thinking how we generate revenue. The traditional tax base is narrowing, and public intolerance, and I repeat, public intolerance for additional taxation is very limited. The solution lies in enhancing non-tax revenue collection. This requires the structural orientation of our ministries, departments, and sagas from passive recipients of allocation of national resources to active, accountable revenue generators. Non-tax measures such as fees, charges, and levies that deterrent state assets can significantly ease the pressure on the exchequer if managed transparently and efficiently. But this also demands for digitization, regular valuation of public assets, and adoption of robust financial management systems. Our aim should be to build self-financing institutions, and this can be really been demonstrated by the growth you've seen in our appropriations in aid, tripling in the last 5 years through the digitization of issuance of government programs. In parallel, we must deepen our engagement with public-private partnerships as a financing model for infrastructure. PPPs, when structured, offer a sustainable path to unlock private sector efficiency innovation without overburdening public finances. But this only works where there is transparency, equitable risk sharing, and sound legal framework. To this end, the PPP Directorate, now to be turned into a State Department, must implement a robust PPP disclosure framework, ensuring that project documents and updates are made accessible throughout the project lifecycle. This transparency is non-negotiable. It safeguards public interest and builds investor confidence. Our institutions must be prepared to evaluate and budget PPPs without rigorous procurement processes, cost-benefit analysis, and long-term performance contracts. We risk replicating the very inefficiencies we seek to avoid. PPPs must be governed not just by contracts, but by the principles of public accountability and value for money. For PPPs remain the future of financing, especially our long-term infrastructure projects. But as such, without accountability, cost-benefit analysis, and proper consultation, then they might end up being the same thing you're trying to avoid, projects that overburden Kenyans and do not bring the full value for money. Another vital pillar of our journey towards economic transformation is financial integrity. As you may know, fellow accountants, on April 16, 2025, the National Assembly passed the Anti-Money Laundering and Combating of Terrorism Financing Laws Amendment Bill, which introduced critical reforms to enhance Kenya's compliance with the national standards. Among other changes, the amendments empowered professional regulatory bodies, including this institute, ICPAK, to play a role in monitoring and enforcing anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism standards. Honorable fellow accountants, this is a key law that was passed this year. It was returned by His Excellency the President to Parliament for reconsideration, but it's very important that you brace yourself on the additional roles that has been given to the Institute through for the fight against anti-money laundering and financial terrorism. And why is this important? If you remember, last year but one, the Financial Task Force took our country from, grey-listed our country. Grey-listing of our country means that we are at least making efforts towards making laws and implementing them to combat anti-money laundering and purification of funds and anti-terrorism. However, those laws are not sufficient. That's why we are grey-listed. So these laws are important now to move from grey list to white list. And this means that if we do not do this, our global finance movements, when you do a swift transfer to another country, or when you're seeking financing for your venture businesses or for non-profit entities, then there will be much more scrutiny. And that's why these laws are very important, because we not just operate in isolation, but we operate in a global financial space. So the global economic implications are clear that a strong AML-CFT framework enhances investor confidence, improves access to international capital markets, and reducing borrowing costs. In today's global financial system, integrity is not just a legal requirement, it is an economic asset. Finally, The Finance Bill of 2025 was tabled before the National Assembly 2 or 3 weeks ago. It offers a pragmatic, principle-based response to our physical challenges. We are faced with limited scope for new taxes, but this bill is proposing to focus on streamlining tax incentives, simplifying tax laws, and enhancing compliance. It looks itself into aligning with our national tax policy and medium-term revenue strategy, and seeks to reduce inefficiencies and promote fairness. VAT's rating has been proposed to be now limited strictly to exports, and exemptions is proposed to be narrowed to essential and processed goods. Deductions under the Income Tax Act is proposed to be tightly linked to actual income generating activities. These are not arbitrary adjustments. They are necessary to align our tax regime with economic logic and national best practices. Incentives at the source market or reward inactivity must or should be phased out. Our tax policy must be guided by efficiency, equity, and transparency. Only then can we foster a business environment that is fair, competitive, and conclusive to a long-term growth. It's important that we appreciate again the role that ICPAK has played and accountants across the country has played in enhancing our laws, especially matters related to finance. Public participation on the Finance Bill of 2025 and the budget estimates for 2025 have started this week. Meetings are held in Nairobi. I was speaking with the chairman and saying that they want to appear next week because the whole of this week you're here. We'll have, when I go back today, we realign ourselves to that. And we'll also be carrying out public participation across 9 counties in the Republic of Kenya. However, fellow accountants, I have always said the emphasis is always on the revenue side. The most unpopular bill in the country becomes a finance bill. Yet at the same time, there is estimates that should be that is discussed at the same time. Public participation on these two. I've been watching the online debate, for example. The only issues raised on the budget has been on a case, the examination, the money for exams that have not been captured in the budget. But that's just a drop in the ocean of a 4.3 trillion shillings budget. So I urge all Kenyans, the same way you scrutinize the finance bill and the revenue side of raising money to finance that budget, let us be robust as such to look at the budget estimates and point out areas that can lead of wastages and areas that we can cut costs. You know, last year, even December, when you're doing the four pieces of law, the tax amendment bill, the tax procedures amendment bill, and the business allowance amendment bill, we received approximately 1,800 written views from members of the public. At the same time, when we're doing the supplementary budget and you're doing the main budget, the total views from the public were less than 200. You can tell where the energies are. And if we leverage on that energy, we can achieve a balance of this country that is balanced and eliminate budgeted corruption, and make sure we have a budget that serves the whole of the Republic of Kenya. Distinguished fellow accountants, what lies ahead is not a question of policy imagination, but political goodwill, institutional discipline, and strategic execution. We have the tools, we have the framework. What we now need is collective resolve. Let us recognize that economic transformation cannot be decreed, it must be built. It must be earned through sound governance, credible institutions, and the careful balancing of fiscal responsibility. Fellow accountants, I would like to bring to your attention some of the bills that are before the Committee of Finance and National Planning for your input and consideration. At the same time, when we're doing the estimates and the finance bill, we'll also be carrying out public participation on Virtual Asset Services Bill. Our chief guest today, in 2018, when I was first elected in my first term as a member of parliament, I did raise a question at the floor of the House on how prepared Kenya was on matters of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. And I remember the response from the then governor of Central Bank, who answered that that is a passing cloud. That is 2018. But I'm happy that 7 years later, what was said to be a passing cloud, we have eventually realized it is here with us to stay. Between July of 2023 and July of 2024, $3.3 billion was exchanged across different platforms on virtual assets. That tells you that this space will soon overtake mobile money transfers and bank transfers. So with a space that remains completely unregulated, it is a big risk for us. But it's also a great opportunity for us, because in the whole of Africa, only Nigeria and South Africa, and I think Ghana, have enacted laws that recognize virtual assets as part of their infrastructure. And therefore, we have a Silicon Valley moment. If you become the first country, the third country to pass good legislation on virtual assets, we will see the best of the Binance and all those other great virtual asset institutions globally come and set base in Kenya as a gateway to operate in Africa. I look forward to the first stable coin being issued in this country, and perhaps that could be the solution to reduce the dollarization of our Kenyan economy. We have the public audit bill that was passed by a committee sponsored by yours truly, that's now before the Senate. And key take home here is it reduces the time between when you are required to submit your financial statements at the end of the year to the Auditor General, so that it gives the Auditor General sufficient time to look at our financial statements. Thirdly, we have the public procurement disposal amendment bill that I sponsored, that's also before the Senate, that among other reasons seeks now to provide fiduciary responsibility to the accounting officer of the entity. Because all these errors of commission and omission that are done whether in our procurement system or our payment system, very few of the PFM Act limits the responsibility to the accounting officer. Now this puts specific penalties to the accounting officer responsible. Most importantly, the Public Procurement Disposal Act, also bill now before the Senate, provides now the legal guideline to migrate from cash to accrual accounting. And I don't need to overstate the importance of cash to accrual accounting to fellow accountants seated here with us today. As we reflect on the responsibility we bear as accountants, auditors, regulators, public servants, let us not forget that integrity is not a slogan, it is a baseline, it is our core capital. And yes, sometimes the fight to reform feels like reconciling a cash book in a storm. But we persist, because we know that in a country of 50 million citizens, only a handful are trained to ask, is that figure supported by documentation? And those are the people we are addressing here today. Let us move forward resolute, principled, and ready, because if anyone can bring order to fiscal chaos, audit to ambiguity, and logic to legislation, it is this accounting fraternity. And remember, while the economy may not always balance, our ledgers must. And if not, well, then it's time for another note, or perhaps a note to self. I thank you. In a special way, I would like to recognize the presence of our PS at the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, Madam Aurelio. A round of applause for Madam PS. I think you'll have a chance to address the congregation. Lastly, fellow accountants, FCPS, and hopefully ICPAK, EFCPN Mengoja, it's my humble duty to request that we all be upstanding and welcome our chief guest today, the enigma of politics, the Pan-African, the intelligent, selfless, resilient, tenacious leader that you've ever had, the Right Honorable Raila ODINGA.
He has led Kenya's democratic transformation for over 50 years as founder of ODM